Please welcome Sadia Sajjad to the front.
Let me check, is it working? Yeah. So pleasure to be here. And after Adam, I think very easy, simplified entrepreneurial company, we now move into the World Bank Group, which is on the other end of the spectrum in terms of how complex the organization is. So before delving into a super interesting topic and very critical for climate transition, it might be useful to first sort of introduce the World Bank Group and how IFC fits within it, so you'll understand how we see the world and where we're coming from. So with that, just a few slides. The reason why I put it up there is mainly, to make it easy for people to understand. So the World Bank Group is essentially 5 entities. And within the World Bank Group, IFC, International Finance Corporations, our mandate is private sector development. So the bank has an overall vision of reducing poverty, increasing shared prosperity, and as of a few weeks ago, we've added another tagline, which is on a livable planet. So climate change has become very, very important in the World Bank Group's overall agenda. And the way IFC goes about meeting its objectives within the World Bank Group which is private sector development in the emerging markets, is by providing financing and advice to companies and projects in the emerging markets. So just to give you a sense of our size. So when we say financing, it's anything from equity, debt, mezzanine, sub-loans, guarantees, short-term instruments, etc. On the advisory side, we provide advice to companies around sustainability-related issues and to governments on anything related to the private sector. So for example, our main aim in terms of providing advice to governments is to facilitate private investment in that particular country. So through these 2 particular avenues, we end up sort of pushing the private sector development agenda in the countries. So last year, roughly, we did about $43 billion worth of business. And of the $43 billion, about 15 billion was directly invested in climate-related projects. And over 85% of what we do is aligned to the principles of the Paris Agreement. Now on the property and what we broadly call the green building side, we have invested over 12 billion over the last 15 years across various subsectors of the real estate market. So from hotels, retail, property, housing, across the whole entire chain. And the interesting bit is that when we are getting involved in any particular project, or we're looking at the real estate sector, we're looking at across different lenses, which is first, we're looking at how can we, one, advise governments in terms of providing advice on building codes, how can we make it easy for the governments to implement and make it easier for the property developers and the real estate players in those markets to implement. We're trying to make sure that the implementation of the building codes are simple. So that is sort of more on the government side. Then on the client side, where most of IFC's work is, we are providing advice to companies on decarbonization pathways. So how can they decarbonize their building, hotel, supermarkets, whatever project we go looking at. And then alongside that, we're trying to support them by providing financing. And the financing can be in the form of loans, bonds, etc. And more recently, what we're trying to do more and more is doing green loans and green bonds and sustainability-linked instruments, which we can get more into if you have any questions around that. The bit which has been game-changing for IFC actually in the real estate space has been what we call is the EDGE tool. EDGE is, and I'm going to, it's excellence in the design of green, sorry, what's the word for it? Green buildings, but I'm going to give you the exact word, which is excellence in design for greater efficiencies, the EDGE program. And the EDGE program, essentially, and when you're talking about tools, Adam, how do we make a tool which is user-friendly and easy for people to adopt? Now, EDGE is a very good example of that. Because in the market before, they were LEED, BREEAM, and other such standards. But the edge tool was extremely effective in terms of decarbonizing or getting buildings in the emerging markets come onto the green agenda. So exactly what the edge tool is, a very simplified process. It's essentially, it's an online tool, easily available to anybody who wants to use it. And it will, you can put in your project details and will, on 3 areas, which is energy, water, materials, will throw out how can you make your building much more efficient along these 3 parameters. And if your building is 20% more efficient than the market standard in that particular local context, then you get an EDGE certification. If your building is 40% more efficient, you will get the advanced EDGE certification. And then there's of course the EDGE net zero certification as well. Very simple, very easy to use, and very much in terms of very much relevant to the local context. Because whenever you are doing a project, say in Nigeria, you need to be able to input the local parameters, etc., that goes into that particular in that particular context. And the EDGE tool today has to date certified around 60 million square meters of space in over 120 countries. And as I was putting my speech together, and I mentioned 60 million square meters of space, and my children are very happy to tell me that's about 350 times the surface area of Taj Mahal and the surrounding areas. So it's quite a bit of, and the EDGE tool, the growth in terms of when the EDGE tool came about, which is about a decade ago, and where we are now is exponential. And now it's independent of IFC. We started it, but now we provide governance, but it's independent of our own operations as well. So more broadly speaking, just coming back to the buildings and the importance of buildings in climate transition. And I think all of us know, and I will repeat it again, the importance of decarbonizing buildings, in order to meet the net zero aspirations that the world has today. So, and just to recap, to remind everyone, the worldwide buildings are responsible for about 40% of global emissions, 34% of energy demand, and 50% of material consumption. And not only that, 30% of all building materials end up in a landfill. And to layer further negative impact on top of that, buildings also have an impact on resource depletion, air, water, land quality, as well as biodiversity loss. So in terms of the impact of this sector on the climate and the importance for the climate agenda, I think it's very clear. And this pressure will continue. Today, about 50% of the world's population lives in urban areas. And with population growth and migration, we're expecting the 50% to move to 70%. And the resulting demand for space, as per our estimation, that essentially you will need to double the floor areas of buildings by 2060. So just to put that in context for a minute, you're talking about the built-up space in the world today times 2 in 3.5 decades. So the pressure that we're talking about is immense. And interestingly, most of the new buildings will come up in the middle-income countries. Asia and Africa will double its stock of buildings. And in other markets such as Europe, Australia, North America, we will see more retrofits because most of the buildings have already been built. So new buildings more in the developing world or the middle-income world, and then in this part of the world, the pressure is going to be more on how to make existing buildings more efficient. And I was reading a report by the Green Building Council talking about the trajectory to net zero, and for us to meet the Paris aligned the Paris goals, all new buildings that are built on this world today have to be net zero by 2030, and 40% of the existing stock needs to be made green by 2030. And then by 2050, all buildings, new and old, need to be net zero to meet their goals of Paris alignment. However, it's not an easy task. The challenge is immense. And further, the same report highlighted and I'm going to read it out, the sector is not making deep systematic changes needed to get on the path to this goal. So, in fact, we are dangerously off track. The global economy must reduce emissions by 45% in the next 7 years to avert, quote-unquote, catastrophic impacts of climate change. And the evidence, as Adam was also saying, has hit home. We've seen, wildfires, we're seeing extreme temperatures and floods, etc. And yet, when you look at this, the whole entire world, and even Europe, which has been a leader on the climate agenda, we do see resistance to green policies. Be it the UK, Germany, Italy, you will notice quite a bit of opposition to anything around green policy making that particular transition. And from where we are sitting, I was thinking about it, for us this is necessary, and not only necessary, we think it's good for business. And perhaps, and again, I've already done this, but I will check myself as well, is that perhaps the narrative needs to change. The narrative around climate transition needs to change. We talk about doom and gloom all the time. But it's not about doom and gloom. It's about seizing the opportunity that climate transition will bring. And narratives are very important in terms of how they shape preferences, how people act. And in every conversation, I think the conversation needs to be around the opportunities that climate transition would bring. And in this particular space, in the green building space, it's quite, sorry, I've started talking, but I'm going to leave that here. In the green building space, the benefits of going green are very, very obvious. There's an increase in revenue, because what we found through evidence and through IFC projects and others, there's increase in occupancy and rents. There's reduced operational costs, and sometimes you're talking about even 70% lower utility costs in certain instances. There are lower insurance premiums. There are higher resale value of buildings. And so essentially the list in terms of, there's greater access to investment, interestingly, by the way, as well, and access to investment possibly even at better rates than you would get otherwise. So essentially what we're talking about is that it's a business opportunity. And we should be looking at the climate transition as a business opportunity, take away the focus on doom and gloom, and talk about the fact that people who are not ready will lose out in the future. I didn't want to use the phrase, you snooze, you snooze, you lose, but I think we can sort of put it out there, is that people need to get on this, otherwise we're talking about companies which will become irrelevant, extinct over certain periods of time. I was told I've got 2 minutes left. I was going to give examples, but I can possibly do that in the next conversation. But I would just like to basically leave it with this particular thought, that we do face a significant climate change challenge. But within this challenge lies immense opportunity. An immense opportunity, and especially those who can see it, prepare today for tomorrow, and they will be the winners of tomorrow. And I think we need to change the narrative around that. Anyways, thank you very much. And